An army went to war in World War II, armed with paintbrushes, phonographs, and inflatable rubber tanks. For decades, their story was erased, official records buried, photographs locked away, and the men who served were ordered to keep silent. They weren't commandos or spies or generals. They were art students, fashion designers, architects, advertising illustrators, sound engineers. And yet, these artists would fool Nazi commanders into believing entire American divisions were moving, attacking, retreating, when in reality, almost no one was there at all. This is the true story of the Ghost Army. In 1944, the war in Europe had reached a tipping point. The Allies had landed in France, but every advance was costly. The German army was still deadly and always watching. From the ground, from the air, from spies hiding in cafes and villages. The United States had a brutal problem. They didn't have enough troops to be strong everywhere at once. But if the Germans discovered where the real attacks were coming from, thousands of soldiers could die. So the U.S. Army tried something insane. They assembled a secret unit, about 1,100 men, and gave them a mission no one had ever attempted on this scale. Their job was not to fight. Their job was to pretend to fight, to look like an armored division of 20, maybe 30,000 troops, when in reality, they were barely enough to fill a college campus. They were officially called the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, but the Germans would know them only through their lies. When the Ghost Army rolled into a town, everything changed. First came the tanks, not real tanks, but enormous inflatable fakes, hauled off trucks like giant rubber carcasses. Art students painted shadows and highlights onto the sides, adding fake mud, fake scuffs, fake serial numbers. From ground level, they looked suspicious. From the sky, through the lens of a hurried reconnaissance plane, they looked like an armored column massing for attack. Then came the convoys. Trucks drove in long, looping routes through villages and roads, creating the illusion of endless traffic. A few vehicles, performing for an invisible audience. They staged busy motor pools, fake maintenance crews, field kitchens that barely served food, but looked perfect from a distance. Some soldiers carved tread patterns into wooden planks, then dragged them through the mud behind jeeps to leave the tracks of heavy armor that didn't exist. Every detail, every smear of paint and trail of mud was a line in a script. Because this wasn't just war, it was theater. But the most haunting part of their performance was sound. The Ghost Army worked with top audio engineers who built an entire library of battlefield noise, engines rumbling, tanks clanking over bridges, men shouting orders, hammering, sawing, building, as if a whole division was fortifying a position. These sounds were pressed onto records and tapes, then blasted at night from huge speakers mounted on trucks. The system was so powerful that German soldiers could hear the army moving 15 miles away. Picture this. You're a German scout, lying in a hedgerow, binoculars in your hands. In the distance, you see the faint outline of tanks, rows of them. Through the darkness, you hear engines, shouted commands, the clatter of equipment. Your report to command is obvious. An American armored division is here. You request reinforcements, but you've just given everything to a handful of actors and a field of rubber. One of the Ghost Army's most dangerous missions came as Allied forces approached the Rhine River. Crossing the Rhine was critical. If the Germans guessed where the crossing would happen, they could obliterate the attackers. So the Ghost Army stepped onto the stage one more time. They impersonated a real unit, the 9th Armored Division. They repainted their vehicles. They stitched new patches on their uniforms. They spoke loudly in bars and cafes about fake plans, knowing enemy ears were everywhere. They set up a phony headquarters, filled with maps, radio chatter, and officers who were mostly art majors in borrowed uniforms. They made themselves impossible to ignore. And the Germans took the bait. They shifted precious troops and artillery to face an attack that was never coming, while the real American units crossed the Rhine somewhere else, with far fewer defenders waiting for them. An army of illusionists had just saved thousands of lives. And then, almost as quickly as they appeared, they vanished. After the war, the Ghost Army's work was classified. For decades, the men who served in the unit couldn't even tell their families what they had done. History books marched on without them. No mention in the chapters about the war. No footnotes about inflatable tanks and phantom divisions. Their artwork, their fake tanks, their photographs, sat in locked cabinets, aging quietly in the dark. Only many years later, when the documents were finally declassified, did the world begin to understand what had happened. That a secret unit of artists, designers, and sound engineers had faced live ammunition with nothing but illusions, that they had pretended to be 20 times larger than they were, just long enough to make the enemy believe a lie. The Ghost Army never fired the biggest guns. They weren't the ones storming the beaches or charging the trenches. But their deceptions shaped the battlefield. Their illusions bent reality just enough to change the course of a war, a forgotten army, from a forgotten chapter of a conflict we thought we already knew. But here, inside the hidden archive, the ghosts finally step into the light. If you want more stories like this, more lost operations, more buried truths from the past, stay with us and subscribe, because history still has secrets.